Hello, my name's Mark George. I'm a criminal barrister based at Garden Court North in Manchester, and I've been involved with Amicus now for over 20 years, and as part of the Amicus at 30 celebration, I'm going to talk a bit about my involvement, what I've done, what I do, and why it's important to get involved with Amicus. So, I actually started death penalty work before I'd ever met Amicus. I'd always been a strong opponent of the death penalty, and the way I ended up actually doing this for myself started off with an interesting story, which I will tell you briefly, about meeting an American attorney when I was doing a trial at the Royal Courts of Justice in London in the late 1980s, and he was over here on vacation, got bored with the usual tourist sites and came to watch an English trial. We became good friends, and later he became a judge. And in the late 1990s, I was particularly keen to try and get involved in this sort of work. And one day, literally out of the blue, as I was sat at my desk doing some work, I got a phone call from a lawyer who told me that he worked in a place called Paris in Lamar County in Texas, right up in the northeast of Texas near the Oklahoma border. And he told me who the judge was in his upcoming capital murder case. And of course, it was the trial lawyer that I'd met 10 years earlier. And the US attorney said to me, "The judge has told us about you and your interest in this work. Would you like to join the defence team?" Well, you can probably imagine roughly how long it took me to utter the words yes. And so it was that in early 1998, I had 2 trips out to Texas to help these guys who were preparing a capital case. And I'll tell you a bit more about the work that I did a little later on. But that's how I got involved, before I'd ever met Amicus. I met Amicus later after I'd come back, and more on that in a minute. So in 1999, this is after I'd first been to Texas, I attended Amicus Training. And my recollection is it was about 12 of us sat round a table in some posh City of London solicitor's firm. And we got on to the issue of jury selection. And at some point I happened to mention that I had attended a court in Texas and seen jury selection. And when I say seen jury selection, I mean days of it, because it took 15 days to swear the jury in this case, which is pretty incredible from an English lawyer's point of view. And so I was asked, well, would you come back and talk about your experience? And that's how I first got involved with training. The first time I attended training and spoke, which was on jury selection, was in, I think, the spring of 2000, and with one year when I couldn't attend one of the sessions, I've been doing it ever since. Over the years, what I talk about has changed, and I now speak with a colleague on capital trials and everything you need to know, and probably some stuff you don't need to know on the law and practice of a capital trial. We look at some of the key cases from the Supreme Court on things like the age eligibility for the death penalty, the effects of intellectual disability, what offences attract a capital charge, and basically how you prepare a capital case, including the very important topic of mitigation, because you can't prepare one of these cases assuming that you're going to be acquitted. The chances are you will have to deal with the mitigation side of this to try and persuade the jury to impose a sentence of life without parole rather than death. I also do the talk on appeals in capital cases. That involves appeals in both state and federal court, and I hope that I try to make it easier to understand what is undoubtedly a very complicated process. I write articles for the journal. I'm on the editorial board. In fact, the next issue of the Amicus Journal has an article by me on the historic decision by the state of Virginia, the first state in the South to abolish the death penalty earlier this year. I also, when I've got the time, speak at various universities, mostly in the Midlands and North, trying to drum up enthusiasm from people who want to get involved with Amicus and the work we do. I have also on occasions helped to draft what are called Amicus Curiae briefs. There are occasions when the Supreme Court will accept briefs from organisations like the Bar Human Rights Committee, for example, in one case where the argument was that the death penalty itself contravened the Eighth Amendment to the US Constitution, and I was asked to draft a piece about the history of the abolition of the death penalty in the UK. I was asked to say a little bit about what Amicus means to me. The answer is it's a means of putting into practice what I believe about human rights and the dignity of all human beings. It seems to me, as lawyers, we must stand up for fair trials and one of the most basic human rights that there is, especially when the life of the defendant is at stake. It's a sorry fact that death row is littered with cases of themselves, the victims of dreadful lawyering standards, cheating police who suppress evidence that would help to exculpate your client, overzealous and racist prosecutors who see winning at all costs as being the important thing rather than seeking to do justice, and making sure that your black client gets tried by a nice southern all-white jury, because as far as that prosecutor is concerned, winning is much more important, and if your client has to die to enhance his career, then that's just the way it will be. That's why it's so important to have an organisation like Amicus that provides the opportunity for lawyers based in the UK to work with their US counterparts, along with the growing volume of casework that UK-based lawyers get involved with, which includes helping with specific aspects of case preparation and drafting briefs and other documents to help the US lawyers. And I'm very proud to have been involved, as I have been, with Amicus now for more than 20 years. And it's a fact that there are today hundreds of barristers and solicitors who have gone on to have very successful careers in this country, who started their journeys by taking the time to work with some of the most amazing lawyers in the United States on behalf of some of the most vulnerable and despised people, those on death row. I mentioned briefly my experience in Texas in 1998. I was involved in drafting all manner of what are called pre-trial motions to the court, stuff that we tend to do in the middle of a trial, they do in advance in the US. And as I say, I attended a number of days of jury selection. It wasn't then until just 4 years ago, in 2017, that I had the chance again to return to Texas, and I spent 2 weeks in Houston working with local lawyers there. And I suppose because of the experience that I've gained as a lawyer in this country, I found myself working rather as a consultant, but I was able to discuss case strategy with the lawyers there, one of which included trying to work out how to persuade a young man in his 20s that the idea of a plea bargain for life without parole was preferable to death. And when you're facing the prospect of the rest of your life in prison with no prospect of release, believe me, some people struggle to see what the point is of fighting to stay alive. As an Amicus Trustee, as you know, a lot of organisations, particularly charities, have a board of trustees. We help to run the charity and make sure it complies properly with the law. I have specific responsibility for both the Amicus Journal and for training, which means that I liaise particularly with Margot, but also with other members of the editorial board, to make sure that the Amicus Journal gets produced and that training is organised in an efficient way, which it always is, thanks to the brilliant team we have. The final thing I was asked to talk about was the value of training to a UK lawyer, particularly if they don't actually have the opportunity or even perhaps the desire to go out and do death penalty work in the US. What's the point of them doing it then? Well, there are a number of things. It seems to me that an understanding of how the US capital system works is interesting and informative in its own right. This, after all, is a country whose legal system is based on the English common law and has developed out of that. And it's one of the reasons why we're able to have some impact in that particular country in a way that we couldn't, for example, with places like China or Saudi Arabia, which badly need assistance from outside, but of course there are completely different legal systems. Some of my own views about jury selection in this country have been influenced undoubtedly by the experience I had in Texas, and I think that particularly in the age of the internet, when we know that juries find out stuff for themselves about a case, I think we still pretend that they don't really know anything about it, and I think we ought to be thinking about, haven't got a decided opinion, but we ought to be thinking about engaging with jurors as to what they do know about a case and what influence that might have on their judgment. But of course judges aren't prepared to do that in this country, partly because they know the Court of Appeal don't approve. Particularly if you want to get involved in casework. As I said, lots of solicitors and a few barristers are involved in casework. It is going to be essential to do the Amicus training, because that does provide really in-depth training, albeit it's only over 2 weekends, as to how the system works and the sort of things you need to be looking for. There's no other organisation that I'm aware of that does anything like this in this country. And the benefit of it is you do get taught by some real experts who know what they're talking about. And many of them have gone out to the US and were former interns themselves doing a placement out there. And they have huge experience, as well as hearing from US-based lawyers who do this work all the time. If you care about human rights, then you ought to be concerned that in the largest Western democracy, they still use a form of punishment that Europe has essentially turned its back on, and for good reason. It seems to me that it's little less than hideous that in the 21st century, people are still put to death for crimes, however heinous they may be. The death penalty itself is a barbaric sentence that has absolutely no place in a civilized society today, and doing training will not only strengthen your arguments yourself for that view, but it will teach you the importance of the concept of fair trials, the concept of due process as the American Constitution recognizes. And in any shape or form, please support Amicus. Sign up for the training. If you for the reasons I've said, even if you can't go out to do a placement. Become a member. It costs £48 a year. You can work that out. It's not a lot of money. If you're at a university, set up an Amicus group and raise funds for the charity, because it's all going towards helping US lawyers, with the assistance of our colleagues here, to ensure justice is available to those on death row, many of whom have been absolutely cheated and are there. Yes, many of them have committed terrible offences, but little, if any, recognition was taken of their own mental health issues, the depravity of their own upbringing, and so on. And it's really important that as lawyers we stand up for fair trials and due process of law, which in many cases was denied to those who are now on death row. So thank you for listening. I've got to get back to my trial shortly, so I'm going to grab something to eat. I hope you enjoy the other talks on here, and I hope this talk has been informative, and I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at the next training later this year. Thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye now.